What's going on, everybody? It's your man Jay Blaze, the Daddy Dialogue Podcast, Father's Day edition, Faith and Fades at his City Barbershop in Hollywood, Florida. Don't you like this barbershop, man? It's nice, right?
I think I love it.
Don't you like this chair?
The chair is amazing. The lighting is really impressive.
The ambiance. Go check them out, hiscitybarbershop.com. Ask for Rafael. I'm not going to say his other name because I don't even know that one.
Classic
we're
pictures
homeboys. I can't
everywhere.
really say the other one. He's an older man now, too. We can't say the other name. But go check out hiscitybarbershop.com. It's in Hollywood, Florida. Great service, great haircuts, great ambiance. And you might even get the gospel, brother, while you're getting a cut. What was it you said? Shaves and what?
Shaves and saved or something.
Yeah.
It was off the top the first.
Yeah. This time it is. I put you on the spot. My bad.
You good.
Yo, but today I'm excited because this is a topic that I've been highly interested in, Alan. And today we have a guest that I've been waiting a while to have, and I'm so honored that he took the time to be with us here. I've known him for a really long time, but as of late, I think he's in the perfect season for this kind of conversation that we're having today, just because not his credentials, but his heart to really help people that are dealing with mental health issues. And so today we have Pastor Jose Fontanez. And before, let me give you his credits. He told me not to do this, but I'm doing them because I think it's important to do them, okay, Alan? Just like how you be like, don't say all my credits, don't say my accolades. This is Pastor Jose Fontanez.
Let me be a friend.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's what. But he is my friend. But I think it's important because of this dialogue we're having today. It's extremely important that people know for so many other reasons. But I'm not going to get into that. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in counseling, psychology from Trinity International University. He's working on his doctorate too, which is also dope. Farrellscounseling.com. Psychologist. He's a Christian. He's a pastor. I've known this man for a really, really long time. Always supported me with doing the radio thing and the music, and how God has really used this season of my life. I've actually been to some of his counseling too, which is really powerful, and I'll tell you why. That sort of deprived or sort of got the light match going for why I thought talking about trauma, learned behavior, and how it affects parenthood is extremely important, especially in Christian circles. It's not happening a lot, or it's not happening, especially in the Latino and Black spaces. It's not happening. It's just it's something, especially Latinos love to keep it quiet, keep it silent. There's some things that we sort of trigger to that our grandmother showed us or our father showed us to sort of do when we're dealing with certain situations, when in reality, it's a mental health issue that needs to be addressed. Conversations need to be had, sessions need to be done. And we're not saying God's word doesn't have power. It is the ultimate divine power of all how we move. But I think in certain cases, some of the stuff some of these things need to be addressed, especially if it's it could be situational with a couple, it could be marriage, it could be kids. And in this realm, in this context, we're going to be talking about how trauma affects us as parents. And I am living proof of it. I think a lot of parents, when they're dealing with issues with their kids and with their parenting style, and this could be a whole other conversation of the 4 different type of parenting style and how trauma affects that. After realizing how trauma affects your parenting style, you realize why you act a certain way you act with your kids, why you might be too aggressive with them, why you're a disciplinarian, and all of them have pros and cons. I'm transitioning from one to another at this point in my life. I think at the beginning, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. I'll let Pastor sort of jump into it and tell us more about that. But we're not going to talk about parenting styles. We'll talk about that later. But trauma is sort of engulfed into it. I think I'm transitioning from one Alan to another. I think my upkeep and how I was raised, we weren't taught as chiquitos to really talk about our emotions, relay them. And so how that triggers us with trauma is when we're deprived of that, the way we parent our kids is by saying, well, I don't want to hear about your feelings. I don't want you to talk about how you feel. I don't think it's important. And so sadly, it's like a vicious cycle. And so it all deprives from trauma. And so today we are only going to touch the surface. I've said this utterly many, many times. I knew this was a topic I wanted to touch. And although in a way, I felt discouraged because I was like, there's just no way that we could touch it. We were talking about this off off camera, there's just no way in 30 minutes from the time that we do this that we can really get into the ins and outs of how this affects us. But I want to sort of shine light and start the dialogue of conversation, and possibly Alan will have more of this coming on. I'm going to tell you, Alan, after dealing with some of this stuff, it made me look internally at like, oh snap, I'm doing these certain things when I'm parenting my child, and it's because of this trauma I haven't dealt with on a personal level. And it takes courage as a parent to be like, I'm going to look inward first,
Absolutely.
deal with this stuff, and when I deal with it, then it affects how I am a father to my son and a husband to my wife. And so we want to be better in this. We talk about that all the time privately. Like, we want to be better fathers, we want to be better husbands. And so I think when we tackle this topic of trauma and start to dabble at it, I think some parents could be like, oh snap, there's some red flags here. I might need to, have the courage to jump in.
Yeah.
All right, so what is childhood trauma? And again, I'll give you all the details for Pastor Jose Fontanez, his website, where he does a lot of his practice. I've been through some of the sessions. I'll tell you more about it at the end here, but let me get to it. What is childhood trauma? Because I think it's important to understand the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful, which is often results in a lasting mental and physical effect, which is something I didn't know, and I realize now is that some of this trauma even affects us physically.
Yep.
And we're talking about like the way we eat, the way we view things. Bro, it is deep, brother. Like it is so much more than, oh, I'm just emotional or depressed. Like it's just so much more deep. And then as I started to get, and we'll get into that, because today it's not about me and you, Alan. It's about Pastor Jose here, who is going to give us some of these tools and things to help us. I'm excited because I think his stuff is so monumental and powerful. Something that I realized that I just want to quickly dab over is that I started deeping into this sea of trauma. I realized that there's different kinds of trauma, which I had no idea that existed. Okay, I'll put you on game, bro, because I'm just getting put on game. So there's three that I came across. I think there's more. It's acute trauma, which it's from an actual single event that was extremely traumatic, and it affects you to this day. It could be one situation, something happening, and it still affects you 20 years down the line. There's chronic trauma, which is repeated, prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. And then there's complex trauma, which is exposure of varied and multiple traumatic events, often as invasive and personal nature. So there's just, and it gets so much more deep than that. This made me think, and I'm going to be extremely vulnerable to give you both something in my personal life that I realized after doing this, how it opened the door to trauma and how it messed me up as a man. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I just feel at peace about it. The way I got introduced to porn was like this. My dad is a mechanic. We would work at different shops. One day, I was a kid. I was like 7 or 8 years old. I needed to use the bathroom. I walked into a bathroom, and there was naked pictures of women everywhere.
Oh, wow.
Everywhere. Like Playboy pictures. And it messed me up. Because the first thing I did was leave, and I looked for another opportunity to come privately and see the pictures.
Yeah.
So I could, by myself. And that one traumatic moment triggered me to start watching porn when I was 15, 16, 17, which is a fight to this day.
Wow.
And that I'm telling you because we're going to talk about it on one of these episodes, because I think it's something a lot of men deal with.
Oh, yeah.
But that is like one sense of trauma that I've dealt with. Something so minute, like just seeing pictures in an old raggedy bathroom in Hialeah somewhere, banged my whole life up. I saw stuff I shouldn't have seen, and it got me in a place, and it started from there, and the vicious cycle started. And I'm sure dads everywhere have stories like that everywhere. Especially now how social media is crazy. So, the connection between trauma and how it shows up in our kids, and this is where we'll go into, Pastor Jose, is that when we don't deal with this trauma and we live it out, our kids see it, and sometimes we even inflect it into their lives. So if you were neglected and your dad never helped you, never encouraged you, never showed you, then eventually what sort of happens, the percentages show that you will do the same thing to your child. Not exactly, but there'll be ways of it. that you'll be neglecting. If you dealt with it in a way, that trauma, and dealt with it in a way where you sort of didn't face it head on and you covered yourself, you sort of didn't look at the problem, then what you'll do is you'll relay that to your child when he's dealing with conflict, and that's how you'll resolve to it. You'll be like, don't deal with that problem. Just neglect it, move along. Or they'll give you un refrán de eso, Boricua Dominicano, that they use. Que, you know, Hispanics get mad, but it's the truth. Un refrán de esos raros que usan, which in reality is just to cover the pain and the guilt and the trauma that hasn't been dealt with. And so that's why I feel this topic is extremely important, because yes, the church is a central hub and it's supposed to do some of these things. But some of these things are a little more complex and they need this aid of it. And so the reason why I think it's extremely important is because if we don't deal with the trauma, then what I've done, and we talked about this in other episodes, I'll grab from a place of learned behavior and past trauma, and I'll dump that on my kid, thinking that he's going to resolve the issue I've never dealt with. So the bullying I didn't deal with, I say, son, well, you're going to beat that kid up, and I'm inflecting what I haven't dealt with internally at 40, telling a 9-year-old, now you deal with that problem.
Yeah.
And that is a vicious cycle that if you don't deal with it and attack it, it can be drastic. And so having Pastor Jose here, I wanted to hear from him, first of all, the cases of, not cases, but maybe understanding, maybe, and I know we sort of touched on it in certain ways, and I don't know all over the place, but I want to make sure we home in on trauma. What other things have you seen that can cause trauma that parents may not, in other words, there's kids, there's parents, there's dads right now that are watching that maybe have trauma that they haven't dealt with, and they may be relaying it to their kids in certain ways. What are some of those ways you have maybe come across, or you've seen examples of, that the parent might not even, they do it so normal and it's so it's a learned behavior that they do it without even, and they think it's cool. Like they think it's, oh, that's what I've done because my dad did that. What are some of those cases that maybe you've come across, that you've experienced, that parents may not, because there may be dads that are, let me get to the point. There may be dads that are watching that may question, be like, maybe I am doing something that's a learned behavior.
Right.
How are some of those signs or things that they could really assess on a personal level to be looking at internally and saying, maybe there's something there?
So I think what we have to first start understanding from a mental health perspective, what we're really talking about is what they call ACEs, A-C-E, which is adverse childhood experiences. So what that includes is moments of crisis and trauma. So I want to be able to lay this out first.
Okay.
Because trauma just doesn't happen to happen, right? What precedes trauma is a crisis.
Okay.
Right? So crisis can be many things. Loss of a loved one, an accident, abuse, simple demeaning words. It could be looking at pictures, right? So everybody is going to experience that decisive moment, which is that crisis phase. Now, how one reacts to that crisis moment determines if the trauma kicks in, okay? So once the trauma kicks in, it's usually because the person has gotten to the point where they feel hopeless. They feel that the end is near, that there's no solution to the problem, and they begin to internalize what just happened, okay? Now, in my work, when I meet with fathers, and it's interesting because it really takes a lot of courage to be able to sit down with somebody and tell them and open up and be vulnerable just as you did. So, and kudos to all those fathers who are willing to do that, because it means that they want to get better. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get better. But here's the issue, that our society and our culture has shown us differently, right? As you said, nosotros los Latinos, los hombres no lloran, tranquilo, no te preocupes, levántate, sigue pa'lante, things of that nature, right? So we all understand where we're coming from. But the reality is that we have to be able to simply stop for a moment and hear people out. So when I talk to men and they're sitting in front of me, I'll give you some examples. So, and we're talking about 50, 60, 70-year-old men.
Wow.
We're not talking about 18 years old here, right? I'm talking about 50, 60, 70-year-old men who have gone through life hoarding this trauma, and the guilt and shame has been so overwhelming in their lives that because of society and culture, they have not wanted to seek counseling because let's be real here, right? In the church, right? There's this idea that no, we shouldn't go to the counselor, we should go to Christ. But I just want to make it clear, we can see a counselor at the same time and speak to a counselor at the same time we're speaking to God.
Come on now.
Right?
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is that, listen, I believe in the power of prayer, but there's times when we go to the Bible, Jesus walked into these neighborhoods, right, and these cities, and the Bible says he healed some people, but he didn't heal everybody. So what happened to those who stayed behind that weren't healed? Somebody had to take care of them, right? So when I meet with men, we're talking about, and this is interesting, this is a true story, older man who, when we look at it, wasn't necessarily any trauma, what we would consider trauma, nothing negative. But he picked up some behavior from mom. Mom would be what we consider today OCD. And that stayed with him up until now. And then so what happened is that this gentleman began to fear leaving home.
Wow.
Once again, nothing bad happened to him. We couldn't identify anything negative, anything adverse. But what we could identify was the fact that mom, every time she left the house, she made sure that the lights were off, right? So it's the OCD kicked in where you would have to turn the light on, the switch, a few times just to make sure you turned it off, right?
Wow.
Where mom would have everything so neatly organized that now that he's an adult, he lives what mom showed him. And then now that has affected his marriage. It has affected his relationships. It has affected his leadership style because he picked up on something that, mom showed. And it's not like mom showed him, hey, this is how you got to do it. From afar, he watched mom. This is how mom acted, so this must be correct.
He was just around their environment.
That's it. And when we talk about trauma, it usually happens in two ways. Number one, either through lived experience or through learned experience. And you mentioned it, right? Learning is just being around the atmosphere, what I'm watching. Now, so the psychological part of this is that if something happens in your surroundings enough times, sooner or later you're going to believe that it's good and that it's true. It can be the worst thing in the world, but because you've seen it so many times, you've convinced yourself, this is normal, this is typical, this is okay, right? And then the lived is that person who went through the abuse, went through the sexual abuse, went through the physical abuse, went through all those different forms of negative adverse experiences. So, when we talk about men, I've had men sitting in front of me crying because the level of shame and guilt has, like I said, overwhelmed them. And to be able to sit with somebody that is non-judgmental, that is willing to listen to them, is a game changer, right? So, once again, men, Listen, so a statistic, I give a conference on men's mental health, and one of the statistics I share is that, and this may be surprising to some people, but the men in the church are struggling just as much, percentage-wise, with men that are not in church when it comes to pornography.
I wanted to ask you something because I feel like every time I speak to someone in this circle of like mental health, there's always a stigma. We sort of spoke about it briefly, like especially among Latino men. Why is it that especially Christian men don't seek? Like they think it's not important, or why is it not happening more, especially with Latino and Black men? Why is that?
It's just afraid, right? Because once again, it's happened so many times in their life that they've been told, don't go to a counselor. Eso no es de Dios.
Que tú eres un loco.
Que tú eres un loco. Yeah, that you're weak.
Oh yeah, I didn't
Right?
think about that too.
They've heard that so many times. Once again, they've made it a reality in their life. So when they come across somebody who, once again, is willing to sit with them and talk to them, and they realize that it's not as bad as they thought it was,
Yeah.
it's a life changer. So once again, and listen, I'm born and raised in the church, right? I just transitioned out of being a pastor after 9 years.
Okay.
So God is leading me to a shift in my ministry to focus more on the mental health aspect, because I think just in general, what we don't realize is that for me to be healthy spiritually, I have to be healthy mentally.
This is interesting you
Some
said
people
this.
combine the two. They think because they're spiritually good that all the trauma and mental
Yeah,
is
it's
just on the
gone. You're
wayside.
right.
And
Like
they're fooling
categorize it.
themselves.
Oh, yo estoy bien espiritualmente.
Yeah,
There's
they're fooling
nothing
them. And they're not. They're really, the reality is they're not good spiritually. They're just saying it because they want others to believe that they are.
I wanted to ask you this, being that you were a pastor 9 years, where was the point, Pastor Jose, that you felt like I'm not meeting that gap between the spiritual and the mental part, and these guys no one's doing beyond? Because I know in a lot of circles, especially Christian circles, there's this notion, well, I'm just going to get a counseling session with the pastor. And sometimes the pastor is not educated in certain fields where they're going to attack those issues mentally. Where was the change for you where you were like, okay, yeah, I know God called me to be a pastor, but there's this space that's missing that I need to go? Because you went all out after many years. You could have just said, I'm just going to keep being a pastor. I'll be a pastor until I'm 80 and I'm done. But you like went back to school. You're like, I'm going to get accredited. I'm going to do what I got to do, and I'm going to fill that other gap. Where was that notion for you to be like, and this wasn't even in the script, but I think it's really important because it shows the defiance and being like, okay, God, there's just more that needs to be done. Was it because there was a lack thereof in your space, in your context, or was it because you just felt God was guiding you that way? And because I'm guessing now at you making this transition, you probably think, oh my God, there was some stuff there was some tools I could have had when I was pastoring. Correct. That I could have helped people in other ways than just a generic, well, I'm just going to pray and we're going to give you what I've said to when was that transition for you?
So it's an interesting question because when I was in high school, I always liked architecture.
Okay.
Right, drafting. I won an award in junior high for a drafting class, so I love that. But I became a father, so I'll give you a little bit of my story.
Mm-hmm.
I became a father at the age of 16.
Oh wow! Okay, you were out there, Pastor. Okay, you were out there. Okay.
So
gotcha. 16.
16. Mm-hmm. I was a pastor's son.
Okay. Whoa, you were.
It be the pastor's son.
Yo, it be the pastor's
And
son.
the pastor's
For real.
son. It be like that.
Yo, my bad.
So,
I've heard this story before. I didn't know this part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this feels normal.
Yeah.
Sadly.
You're like, I feel like home.
Yeah.
Been there, done that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not PK, but all the PKs
you
I
heard
know.
this one
Gotcha.
before.
All right. So in that process, I was still, I think, in my 12th grade, somewhere around there. So I dedicated myself, obviously I had to go to work, and I dedicated myself to raising my son. and had to get married, in the Christian church, right? They were like, no, te tienen que casar. Okay, that's fine.
La presión en serio.
Yeah, so we got married. That's fine, and I'm still with my wife
wow.
after 32
That's
years.
awesome.
So yeah, and in that process of raising my son, then my daughter was born 4 years later, right? So at the age of 20, I became a daughter to 2 kids, and up until my 30s, I decided, when my son had graduated high school, and then my daughter was in the 11th grade. And once I knew she was going to 12th and eventually would graduate, I said to myself, it's my time. It's my time. And at that point, like I said, born and raised in the church, I was seeing a lot of need in the church that was not being filled or not being addressed or met, right? And at that time, when I said, now it's my turn, I decided to go into counseling, into psychology. And I did that. I went into psychology, studying that. I'm still studying that in my doctorate. But what's interesting is that throughout these years that God has opened doors within the Hispanic church, I've come to see that people that are sitting in the pews, while from the altar it's not being taught, the people in the pews are asking for it. And because the people in the altar are not prepared specifically in this area, they feel challenged to be able to speak about it. And even to invite somebody that does have the experience and the educational background to address it, they think twice about it. So that's what happened to me. Like I said, when my daughter was about to graduate, I said, it's my time.
My time.
And I don't regret it. I don't regret it. And I want to continue preparing myself because I know the need is there.
And so the transition to psychology happened after she was going into the 12th grade, correct?
Yes, correct.
And do you wish now you had gone into it earlier? And did you get, and this is the other part of this question because I was dying to ask you, did you get any pushback from anybody near or any Christians that said, what are you doing? Why are you going to school for psychology? Was that ever?
Absolutely. Yes. There was a few people that said, man, you better, think about it twice. Are you sure you want to do that? But I was confident where I was, right? In the process of my life. I knew what I wanted to do and I understood why I had to do it. Thinking about, why I did it, once again, I recognized the need. And I knew that's, one thing that we have to figure out, there's people that are for many years in the church and just, they say, well, I don't know what God called me for. And so my response to that is, what breaks your heart? Right? What breaks your heart? Is it the kids?
It is.
Is it those women who are suffering from human trafficking? Is it those women who are suffering from domestic violence? What is it? What breaks your heart? And once you are able to identify that, then you start focusing in that area. And that's what broke my heart.
Damn, I need to hear that, bro.
Right?
I love that you.
I needed to hear that.
I love that you said it you said a paragraph with a sentence. I've always admired people who achieve your level of mental success to be able to do that, because that's exactly what I decided to do, rather than saying, hey, these kids are off their ranks. That it broke my heart. Why don't I just go in and serve? So I serve the real young kids.
There it is. And that's how we find out.
It's validation. Like
it's
something
concreted something right there.
Yeah, it's something I definitely need to hear. And so, I know we're dabbling into your personal life and the transition and the stigma of why some Christians don't believe mental health is important. Being that we're talking about this, and we'll jump right back into the trauma in a second, do you think it's necessary for pastors to be equipped with that?
Absolutely.
Especially now, correct?
Absolutely. And once again, the people in the pews are asking for it. One of my concerns is that, and like I said, I've been born and raised in the church, been living all my life here in South Florida. I have a lot of connections to different organizations. And as I look across the field of organizations, when it comes to putting somebody in a pulpit to be a pastor, it's about a few years of Bible study.